So, just to introduce who is here speaking today, my name is David Rifkin. I work in developer relations here at Embrace. I've worked in mobile engineering since before Swift came out, and now I'm a developer relations engineer trying to help teams really understand user interaction from a technical level.
And hey, everybody, I'm Kasey Smith. I'm the Senior Product Manager here at Embrace. I have a background in data and machine learning, focused largely on kind of observability and predictive monitoring solutions. And I was the lead PM on this user journeys that we're about to talk about.
Awesome. So, just a rundown of what we're going to talk about today. First, we'll just discuss a little bit about what reliability is for users and user facing apps. Then, we'll talk about user journeys, the product suite that we are introducing here. We'll talk about an important feature of user journeys, the user flows, which are really the building blocks of the entire user journeys suite. Then, we'll demo that feature and we'll talk a little bit about what comes next in user journeys.
Uh, David, let's just take one little pause here real quick. I don't think that we're seeing the slides change.
Are you seeing it now?
Nope.
Oh
Oh,
boy.
there we go. I think we just jumped to the right slide.
Okay. Sorry about that. We might be on a bit of a delay.
All right.
Um, all right. So let's talk about reliability for users, which I hope everyone is able to see right now. When we talk about reliability, what we're saying is, why isn't something getting done? This is just like any other technical process in any other part of our architecture. We have observability on the front end, but it's not just about the technical details when you're talking about the front end. We're talking about what affects users. Can you all see the next slide? Oh boy, I'm
No.
sorry. We might be on a little delay here.
There we go.
All right. So I'm going to try to anticipate that delay when I change the slides. Sorry, everyone, for the bit of technical difficulty here. But here's the old picture, which is reliability in backend systems. So this is our typical picture for reliability professionals. You monitor endpoints, services, dashboards, and SLOs. You're looking at numbers, statistics, all the way down to, let's say, 3, 5 decimal places to make sure that the service is working correctly. There's a lot to watch, but what can you really find out about user-facing applications? Because for user-facing applications, we actually have a whole spectrum of data that we're trying to gather. There are different tools that gather different information. For product analytics tools, we have a high context but a low granularity. For observability tools, we have a low context and a high granularity. These issues, any issues that come out of our app, are probably solved in the middle, but require a lot of guesswork. Because let's take a standard scenario here. Say there's a product analytics tool that is telling us our user engagement is trending the wrong way. We don't have any technical insight, so the engineering team might say, well, tell us what to change, but the product team has no answer without any technical details. So they might call in the design team and they'll go through exercises to understand what's going wrong with the UI and recommend changes that are based on assumptions rather than hard data. They'll work on a UX fix, they'll get it out to production. Everyone is pleased that the engagement issue has been solved with that new release. But you look 6, 12 weeks later, and nothing improved because the whole time there was a front end component that was inconsistent, slow, and hard to test. You would only know that if you captured technical data from production to enhance your analytics. Because the goal of reliability is being able to look at a system and figure out why. Why didn't the changes stick? And how can we build more reliably in the future? Or to put it very simply, it didn't work. Why? Well, you probably need to bridge the gap between something like product analytics and behavioral data, and then on the other hand, highly technical observability data. Um, Oh boy. So we're on quite a delay here. I am actually I'm gonna reshare here, y'all. Just give me just a sec. Sorry for this difficulty.
We're still having challenges, David. I can try to share too. Ah, there we go.
All right. So I'm gonna
Perfect.
stay in this window. Sorry again. It didn't work. Why didn't it work? We're going to bridge the gap between pure product analytics and highly technical observability data. From the front end, we know that there are crashes and errors, and those are bad. But do we know which are the worst? Can we prioritize that? We also have other signals like traces, which can be long or short. Which of those is good? Logs, is it good to get a log? Networking, how do we know that's succeeded? Without context, we can't decide what information is important. And the context is centered around the user of the app. So we need to get real client-side information. We can skip proxy metrics like API endpoints that tell you a session ID. That's just telling you about the server's interaction. What you really want to know is, did you fumble the server's response? Did you load too much content onto the page? Did an experiment unintentionally affect another part of the app? Because that effect is going to bubble up to your KPIs. You need to treat engagement here as a reliability signal that affects your business. By connecting the front end telemetry like networking, JavaScript exceptions, uh, crashes to real user behavior, you can actually start to solve business issues and you can prioritize for the user's actions. And the good thing here is that teams are already trying to do this, but everyone is looking at different tools for information about the same experience, often with the same data. Product managers want to know what affected funnel and apps growth and engagement. Developers want to know if their latest changes around the product search feature might have introduced any errors or degraded performance. SREs want to know who to tap to fine tune performance on the checkout experience in the app. And an engineering manager wants to know where to devote their technical resources for revenue affecting parts of the app. Luckily,
We've got user journeys. I mean, if there's a better allegory out there for the slide challenges that we had here, sharing through this webinar, how many times do product teams or engineering teams look at their dashboards and say things are moving in the right direction or the wrong direction? Especially if they're moving in the wrong direction, people are disengaging, people are stopping sharing, people are exiting a task that we think as developers they should be completing. Um, you know, how do we tie that to what a user is actually seeing on their side? So we believe that there's, it's time to be opinionated about telemetry. Telemetry is more than just, are my distributed services working in the nines, right? And more along the lines of, are are my services working in a way that services the user for them to be able to experience the thing that we've built this application for? Um, and we think that can be done through more than just flowcharts, more than just Sankey diagrams. You should be able to understand the application that a user is experiencing through their eyes. We've had a strong opinion about this for a while, and earlier this year we went out and we interviewed a bunch of customers, some of which maybe are on this webinar, and we found that all product and engineering teams, largely engineering teams, kind of had the same problem they couldn't quite put into words. But as we talked to more and more people, we heard more and more experiences of their use, engineering teams' use of observability tools. What we really found is kind of these four main themes. Engineering teams struggle to contextualize the data. They may get a ton of data in their observability platform through the Embrace SDK, wherever, but it doesn't really give you an idea of where the user is or what they were trying to achieve in an easy way. It's really hard to correlate certain events, certain metadata about sessions, certain Maybe in a certain region they're starting to have an issue, or on this certain OS version, there's more likely to abandon a certain task. And it's really hard to kind of tie those things together when you have just a bunch of space to explore, but no real focus. Operationally, as well as just kind of explaining the application back to the business, teams struggle to segment the app into kind of relevant golden paths. We heard a lot. And lastly, given all of that, it's tough to kind of discover emerging problems. You're stuck in this kind of firefighting. Every new issue is kind of on this equal level of importance. And so being able to kind of discover what's changing, why is it changing, where do I need to focus my limited time or my limited team's time to be able to start to figure out what I need to go pay attention to. So we went back to the drawing board and we thought, let's imagine a world where product teams that classically use product analytics tools and look at Sankey diagrams and are kind of tracking business level KPIs with engineering telemetry data to really start to be able to speak the same language and experience customers' perspective, right? How is the performance of my application, not just its design, not just its UX, not just how it transitions from one page to another, but how is the performance of this app really driving user behavior? And so, given that the best apps in the world have the best tooling, we wanted to try to go and solve this problem. So, two things we know. We know that you have to have high level aggregate data to be able to understand where the trends are moving, how they're moving. We know that to understand how somebody is completing a task in an application, you need to not only know completion and abandon rate, but you should also really understand error rates. Not just are they experiencing an error, but is the error causing them to exit? And if it does, do they come back? And lastly, session volume is really important. There are plenty of times where we've, put runtime errors into applications and it kills somebody's ability to get to a certain task that they need to be able to. So if you can start to break up your application into kind of a set of tasks that users complete, what you can start to do with this data is start to understand, where do I need to go pay attention? I can stack rank where I can prioritize my team's limited time in a manner that's affecting the actual user's experience, not just making sure that all of my dashboards are green. The other thing is that you can't just abstract away all the details, because once you understand where things are trending, you can't be prevented from digging in. And so what we wanted to really be able to do was also let users, let engineering teams be able to explore the nuances and the details that you're piping into the telemetry that's already coming off of your app that you've already instrumented. And so to do this, we wanted to make sure that you could, really start to, we could kind of reduce the problem space so that you're not left with just a custom dashboard that you can go explore and cut up data in a million different ways, but really start to give you kind of an opinionated stance on, here are the attribute distributions, here are things that you need to go pay attention to, here are things that are affecting users completing certain tasks. So user journeys is this kind of platform that we've moved towards. User journeys is obviously not a new term in the market, but we've taken kind of a different perspective on user journeys. It should be more than just Sankey diagrams and attrition rates, but more specifically, you should be able to really understand what are the commonalities that are driving user behavior and what kind of performance can we prioritize as product and engineering teams to really drive user behavior, either positively or keep them engaged. So all of this kind of bundles up to looking at aggregate data, but also being able to drill down into individual sessions to really trace what a specific user is experiencing through their eyes, ideally using telemetry that you already emit off of your app. So again, any good application takes a bunch of different people in different teams. Product may be interested in looking at how certain user engagement is tying to business KPIs. A dev may only be responsible for one part of an app and be able to just want to look at data in context of what they're hunting for. SREs may be paying attention to how backend systems are performing and how they're getting hit, and want to know which team to go poke, right? And engineering managers, more than anything, really want to make sure that like their limited set of resources are being properly, properly distributed into things that are actually making the application better and driving towards larger business goals. So to do this, user journeys is a big problem to tackle. And so we said, let's go down to first principles and let's really understand what makes up a user journey. And this is where we come to the idea of user flows as building blocks to a larger end-to-end experience. And the reason we really prioritize this is because understanding how somebody moves completely through an application can be a lot of things to try to process, and it doesn't give you kind of the granularity, and it doesn't start to build that gap between product analytics tools and classic observability tools. And so what we wanted to do was start on this path of building user flows that you can start to assemble using telemetry that you already emit off of your own app in ways that make sense, right? So most applications, web applications, mobile applications, whatever they are, you've probably already got some amount of telemetry coming off of them, whether you've gone in and instrumented spans, or whether you're just looking at network calls to specific endpoints, or whether you're looking at crashes and ANRs and issues that come out of an app. The thing is that you've kind of already got a surface that you can start to attach to. And what we wanted to make sure is that getting analytics data, really understanding an application through a user's eyes, isn't gated by having to prioritize going and instrumenting your applications with more events to get there. So user flows is built in a way that kind of allows people to attach to events that already exist in an app. So let's say that you've got a network call to fetch suggestions for a search. You're an e-commerce app. People largely come into your app, search for products, find products, add them to a cart, and check out. That end-to-end flow of how somebody enters your app to completing a purchase is an entire journey. But really, a journey is made up of these little segments, right? And so you may have a network call to an endpoint to fetch suggestions, and you may have a span event already put in that says that a product page is fully hydrated. So we wanted to build flows in a way that you could flexibly attach to these things that you already exist. So you can start a flow at the network call to fetch suggestions, and you can end a flow at that breadcrumb that says that a product page is already has fully hydrated. That completes a flow, and you can start to experience how a user sees that on the client side, kind of through this telemetry. And by breaking things down into flows, you can also kind of prioritize what's important. Maybe adding a payment method is as important as adding something to a cart, but maybe those two things aren't quite as important as making sure that a payment completes. And so you can start to kind of order these things and prioritize where you want to start making effective change on users' experiences and start moving business KPIs in the right direction, or just move user satisfaction in the right direction. Maybe there are certain pages or certain functions or certain tasks inside of your application that users just have less patience for. And through user flows, you can really start to understand, where do they have less patience? Where can I start to move the needle? Where can I start making sure that not only are we keeping users engaged, but they're just more satisfied with the application? So what we can do here is with flows, we can start to kind of abstract away the granularity of signals and assemble these things into kind of contextualized bits to understand the experience on the client side. Um, Looking ahead, I'm going to hand it back over to David to give us a little bit of a demo here on what we've got live in production. So,
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. And I'm just going to switch our tabs here in what we're sharing. While I do that, again, if y'all have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A. Casey, can you see now the Embrace dashboard?
yes, sir.
Awesome. So here we have a list of our user flows that already exist for this app. This screen gives us a high level understanding of the completion rate, the error rate, the abandon rate for each flow that we've built out of existing telemetry. For each of these flows, we're going to capture it over a given period, and we're going to also note the relative change in completion for that flow during the previous period. Anyone on the team can look at this screen and get a good sense of whether, well, the confirm address step in our checkout process or journey is working. Is it working better? Did we have any significant performance changes in the last few days, hours, weeks? We see flows as part of a search process as well, and also breaking down login in addition to that checkout step. Let's add another flow for checkout where we try to see, hey, what's going to happen with um, when we load the checkout screen. So let's give it a name, checkout, load. The initial checkout screen will be the payment screen, and we'll give it a description so people know what we're talking about when they look at our user journeys. Then down here, when we get to the configuration step, we see that there's a start event and an end event. Our start events are telemetry that's already captured by the Embrace SDK. So we've got breadcrumbs, logs, spans, networking, and all of them get mapped to this user flow for the various sessions we're looking at. Here, I'm going to select a breadcrumb, which is just a lightweight message that triggers each time the user starts our inventory page. But here I've got an issue because I don't actually know the origin of checkout. So maybe it was from our lists, or maybe it was from our product page. The nice thing here is we've got a great way to wildcard all this. So if we don't know exactly what the origin was for the message, we can just wildcard out that step. Let's test it. Yep. All right, the wildcard's working. We can use the breadcrumbs for that. And then let's make sure to note that our our user flow here ends when we start to when we get a span that navigates us to the checkout screen. So here we're just navigating, we just have a flow navigating us from a given page to the checkout screen. Then finally, at the bottom, we have a timeout. It's just, in reasonable terms, it just means 5 minutes have passed before the end of the flow. If you go further than 5 minutes, that's an abandon. Makes sense for human beings. It shouldn't take 5 minutes to get from a screen to the beginning of a checkout process. You can also change this value. So if we create this, we now see our list of flows. This is going to start gathering information from here on to measure this flow against its previous performance. Now, let's step into a single flow, and this is kind of where the fun begins. We can look into the details of the flow, starting with what app versions it occurred on, and then we can start to look at the completion rate for it. So if there were any abandons or errors, that'll affect our completion rate here. We can also see a list of all individual sessions in which this user flow occurred. So that's a great start, and we can start to see how our app was performing across versions. We can also see the session volume across those versions. But I think this is the really exciting part. If we want to get into upgrading our data to knowledge, we can start to play with all the various dimensions that affect this user flow. So let's talk about tree maps. These are a great configuration where more information means better. Here we can select and deselect whether those sessions that had this user flow were completed or just errored or abandoned, which is human behavior. And we can get a sense across different dimensions here what happened and in what circumstances. We can change what's being visualized, maybe by app version, or if we really get into it, we can actually use some of our own session attributes that we've added. So here, it seems like there's an experiment going on for this flow. And naturally, this is a condition of live demos where it should have loaded. I'm just going to reset this. But we can use all the properties that have been assigned by the SDK to each session to start to filter down on the dimensions of the flow. And then if we hover over those dimensions, we can see whether or not whether or not we're seeing more success on a certain given app version here or OS version here. There's only one OS running this app in the last 3 hours. And the cool thing is, if we click it, it'll filter the sessions below, and it'll actually let us go right into the user activity for that specific session. And we can see all the stuff that happened in that given session, along with the user flow here. So user flows give you that highest level of data all the way down to the specific session when that specific action happened for that specific user. And that's our user flows. So I'm gonna switch back here. Thank you all for humoring my Zoom inabilities. And we're gonna take one last section before questions. I'm gonna pass it back to Kasey to tell us about what's next in user journeys.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Um, So, user flows is just the first step in, I'll say, our journey to promised land that we think is out there, right? That kind of brings product teams and engineering teams into the same platform to discuss how to optimize a product with the same data, right, through the eyes of user. So not only do we have what we built today, there's a long roadmap that we're already starting to build out, things that we want to do. Some of these things are things like being able to do things that you'd expect, like sequential events, explorers, be able to kind of understand the permutations of how people get from one point to another, specifically understand where they're seeing problems, where they're dropping out with certain levels of strength. But also kind of keep that same level of granularity that you were getting with tree maps or other kind of visual explorers, is really understand like, well, what are my common attributes? If I'm seeing a crash here, is there any sort of kind of clustering of attributes that kind of seems to coincide with that? So we want to be able to kind of make it easy and flexible for you to understand kind of what's happening, what are the different permutations, does maybe one permutation of this flow tend to keep people engaged more than another, and how can I kind of optimize for that? Other things that we want to do is like give you things like issue heat maps so that you can just like really quickly understand like, oh, I see crashes in my aggregate data a lot on event 6 in this flow compared to later, right? Maybe people are starting to run into issues earlier in this flow and I need to optimize for that. Different ways of kind of exploring attribute correlations to certain issue types that you might see. And lastly, of course, we want to allow you to kind of stitch these together flexibly into kind of end-to-end experiences. Assemble these things in ways that you can kind of see how people move from place to place, where you see quick drop-offs. This is kind of more classic product analytics, but what we wanted to do is build out that kind of granular level first, rather than doing something like this where you start to understand that people are dropping off, but you can't really dig into the details on why. And so assembling, using flow, building flows first, and then letting you kind of assemble those into end-to-end experiences as teams start to map to this and start to use this more often. And you get your product teams and, other kind of stakeholders starting to kind of view this information. You can start to assemble these. We also have things like uh, flow ownership, so that you can start to kind of break these things out operationally into different areas of ownership. Different teams might need to find certain things or only pay attention to certain flows that are kind of key. Um, and beyond this, there's a ton of other stuff that we want to do, from custom dashboards, being able to, you can kind of take this data to other places, chop it up as you see fit, rather than just in pre-built kind of pre-built visualizations. Alerting and thresholding, right? Like maybe I want an alert to know when an error in a specific flow is above a certain value, not just any error is above a certain value. Things like machine learning back pattern analysis, attribute and issue clustering, I think is really important. So you can kind of understand what are the kind of cohorts and commonalities that are both driving people away, but also keeping them engaged. And also things like insights into temporal pattern analysis. This is, a big tie back to OTel, which we're built on. We want to make sure that things like, classic standards that we use in the industry that are kind of fixed, like somebody tends to drop off if they have to wait more than 2 seconds. That might not be universal. We want to also make sure that you can kind of view those things dynamically. Maybe somebody has a half a second worth of patience for task one, but they don't have a half a second's worth of patience for task three. And being able to view these things dynamically in a way that allows you to kind of create any sort of combination of start and end event that makes sense based on your telemetry strategy already, in a way that kind of allows you to get these insights. So we also want to hear from you. Please join our Embrace community Slack channel. I'm in there all the time. Send us feedback. If you are already Embrace customer, reach out to your customer success manager. I'd be happy to hop on a phone call and talk more about this in depth. But we want to hear your feedback because we want to know what works best for you and your teams.